Beatty stood there looking at him steadily with his eyes, while his mouth opened and began to laugh very softly. Montague looked at the cards in his own hands. I've been thinking about the fire last week, about the man whose library we fixed. What happened to him? They took him screaming off to the asylum. He wasn't insane. Beatty arranged his cards quietly. Any man's insane who thinks he can fool the government and us. I tried to imagine, said Montague, just how it would feel. I mean, to have firemen burn our houses and our books. We haven't any books. But if we did have some. You got some? Beatty blinked slowly. No, Montague gazed beyond them to the wall with the typed lists of 1,000,000 forbidden books. Their names leapt in fire, burning down the years under his axe and his hose, which sprayed not water but kerosene. No, but in his mind a cool wind started up and blew out of the ventilator grill at home, softly, softly chilling his face. And again he saw himself in a green park, talking to an old man, a very old man, and the wind from the park was cold too. Montague hesitated. Was it always like this? The firehouse, our work? I mean, well, once upon a time. Once upon a time, Beatty said. What kind of talk is that? Fool, thought Montague to himself. You'll give it away. At the last fire, a book of fairy tales, he glanced at a single line. I mean, he said, in the old days, before homes were completely fireproofed. Suddenly it seemed a much younger voice was speaking to him. He opened his mouth, and it was Clarice McClellan saying, Didn't firemen prevent fires rather than stoke them up and get them going? That's rich, Stoneman said. Stoneman and Black drew forth their rule books, which also contained brief histories of the firemen of America, and laid them out where Montague, though long familiar with them, might read. Established 1790 to burn English-influenced books in the colonies. First fireman, Benjamin Franklin. Rule 1. Answer the alarm swiftly. 2. Start the fire swiftly. 3. Burn everything. 4. Report back to firehouse immediately. 5. Stand alert for other alarms. Everyone watched Montague. He did not move. The alarm sounded. The bell in the ceiling kicked itself 200 times. Suddenly there were 4 empty chairs. The cards fell in a flurry of snow. The brass pole shivered. The men were gone. Montague slid down the pole like a man in a dream. The mechanical hound leapt up in its kennel, its eyes all green flame. Montague, you forgot your helmet. He seized it off the wall behind him, ran, leapt, and they were off. The night wind hammering about, their siren scream, and their mighty metal thunder. Stoneman held out the telephone alarm card with the complaint signed and telephone duplicate on the back. Have reason to suspect attic, 11 number Elm Street, City, E.B. That would be Mrs. Blake, my neighbor, said the woman, reading the initials. All right, men, let's get 'em. Next thing they were up in musty blackness, swinging silver hatches at doors that were, after all, unlocked, tumbling through like boys, all frolic and shout. Hey! A fountain of books sprang down upon Montague as he climbed shuddering up the sheer stairwell. How inconvenient! Always before it had been like snuffing a candle. The police went first and adhesive taped the victim's mouth and banged him off into their glittering beetle cars, so when you arrived you found an empty house. You weren't hurting anyone, you were hurting only things. And since things really couldn't be hurt, since things felt nothing, and things don't scream or whimper, as this woman might begin to scream and cry out, there was nothing to tease your conscience later. You were simply cleaning up, janitorial work essentially, everything to its proper place. But now, tonight, someone had slipped. This woman was spoiling the ritual. She made the empty rooms roar with accusation and shake down a fine dust of guilt that was sucked in their nostrils as they plunged about. Montague felt an immense irritation. She shouldn't be here on top of everything. Books bombarded his shoulders, his arms, his upturned face. A book alighted almost obediently, like a white pigeon in his hands, wings fluttering. In the dim, wavering light, a page hung open, and it was like a snowy feather, the words delicately painted thereon. In all the rush and fervor, Montague had only an instant to read a line, but it blazed in his mind for the next minute as if stamped there with fiery steel. Time has fallen asleep in the afternoon sunshine. He dropped the book. Immediately another fell into his arms. Montague, up here! Montague's hands closed like a mouth, crushing the book with wild devotion, with an insanity of mindlessness to his chest. The men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below like a small girl among the bodies. Montague had done nothing. His hand had done it all. His hand, with a brain of its own, with a conscience and a curiosity in each trembling finger, had turned thief. Now it plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to his sweating armpit, rushed out empty with a magician's flourish. "Look here, innocent, look!" He gazed shaken at that white hand. He held it way out as if he were far-sighted. He held it close as if he were blind. "Montague," he jerked about, "don't stand there, idiot." The books lay like great mounds of fishes left to dry. The men danced and slipped and fell over them. Titles glittered their golden eyes, falling, gone. Kerosene, they pumped the cold fluid from the numbered 451 tanks strapped to their shoulders. They coated each book, they pumped rooms full of it. They hurried downstairs. Montague staggered after them in the kerosene fumes. "Come on, woman." The woman knelt among the books, touching the drenched leather and cardboard, reading the gilt titles with her fingers, while her eyes accused Montague. "You can't ever have my book," she said. "You know the law," said Beatty. "Where's your common sense? None of those books agree with each other. You've been locked up here for years with a regular damn Tower of Babel. Snap out of it. The people in those books never lived. Come on now." She shook her head. "The whole house is going up," said Beatty. The men walked clumsily to the door. They glanced back at Montague, who stood near the woman. "You're not leaving her here," he protested. "She won't come." "Force her, then." Beatty raised his hand in which concealed the igniter. "We're due back at the house. Besides, these fanatics always try suicide. The pattern's familiar." Montague placed his hand on the woman's elbow. "You can come with me." "No," she said. "Thank you anyway." "I'm counting to 10, said Beatty. 1, 2. "Please," said Montague. "Go on," said the woman. 3, 4. "Here." Montague pulled at the woman. The woman replied quietly, "I want to stay here." 5, 6. "You can stop counting," she said. She opened the fingers of one hand slightly, and in the palm of the hand was a single, slender object, an original kitchen match. The sight of it rushed the men out and down away from the house. Captain Beatty, keeping his dignity, backed slowly through the front door, his pink face burnt and shiny from 1,000 fires and night excitements. God, thought Montague, how true. Always at night the alarm comes, never by day. It is because the fire is prettier by night? More spectacle, a better show? The pink face of Beatty now showed the faintest panic in the door. The woman's hand twitched on the single matchstick. The fumes of kerosene bloomed up about her. Montague felt the hidden book pound like a heart against his chest. "Go on," said the woman, and Montague felt himself back away and away out of the door, after Beatty, down the steps, across the lawn, where the path of kerosene lay like the track of some evil snail. On the front porch, where she had come to weigh them quietly with her eyes, her quietness a condemnation, the woman stood motionless. Beatty flicked his fingers to spark the kerosene. He was too late. Montague gasped. The woman on the porch reached out with contempt for them all and struck the kitchen match against the railing. People ran out of houses all down the street. They said nothing on their way back to the firehouse. Nobody looked at anyone else. Montague sat in the front seat with Beatty and Black. They did not even smoke their pipes. They sat there looking out of the front of the great salamander as they turned a corner and went silently on. "Master Ridley," said Montague at last. "What?" said Beatty. "She said, 'Master Ridley.' She said some crazy thing when we came in the door. 'Play the man.' She said, 'Master Ridley, something, something, something.' We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England as I trust shall never be put out," said Beatty. Stoneman glanced over at the captain, as did Montague, startled. Beatty rubbed his chin. "A man named Latimer said that to a man named Nicholas Ridley, as they were being burnt alive at Oxford for heresy on October 16th, 1555. Montague and Stoneman went back to looking at the street as it moved under the engine wheels. "I'm full of bits and pieces," said Beatty. "Most fire captains have to be. Sometimes I surprise myself. Watch it, Stoneman!" Stoneman braked the truck. Damn, said Beatty. You've gone right by the corner where we turned for the firehouse. He had chills and fever in the morning. You can't be sick, said Mildred. You were all right last night. No, I wasn't all right, he heard the relative shouting in the parlor. You've got to get up, she said. It's noon. You've slept 5 hours later than usual. Will you turn the parlor off, he asked. That's my family. Will you turn it off for a sick man? I'll turn it down. She went out of the room and did nothing to the parlor and came back. Is that better? Thanks. That's my favorite program, she said. What about the aspirin? You've never been sick before. She went away again. Well, I'm sick now. I'm not going to work tonight. Call Beatty for me. Oh, did something happen? A fire is all. I had a nice evening, she said in the bathroom. What doing? The parlor. What was on? Programs. Mildred came in humming. She was surprised. Why'd you do that? He looked with dismay at the floor. We burned an old woman with her books. It's a good thing the rug's washable. She fetched a mop and worked on it. I went to Helen's last night. Couldn't you get the shows in your own parlor? Sure, but it's nice visiting. She went out into the parlor. He heard her singing. Mildred, he called. She returned, singing, snapping her fingers softly. Aren't you going to ask me about last night? He said. What about it? We burned 1,000 books. We burned a woman. Well? The parlor was exploding with sound. We burned copies of Dante and Swift and Marcellus Aurelius. Wasn't he a European? Something like that. Wasn't he a radical? I never read him. He was a radical. Mildred fiddled with the telephone. You don't expect me to call Captain Beatty, do you? You must. Don't shout. I wasn't shouting. He was up in bed suddenly, enraged and flushed and shaking. The parlor roared in the hot air. I can't call him. I can't tell him I'm sick. Why? Because you're afraid, he thought. A child feigning illness, afraid to call because after a moment's discussion the conversation would run so. Yes, Captain, I feel better already. I'll be in at 10 o'clock tonight. You're not sick, said Mildred. Montague fell back in bed. He reached under his pillow. The hidden book was still there. Mildred, how would it be if, well, maybe I'd quit my job a while? You want to give up everything after all these years of working because one night some woman in her books? You should have seen her, Millie. She's nothing to me. She shouldn't have had books. It was her responsibility. She should have thought of that. I hate her. She's got you going, and next thing you know, we'll be out. No house, no job, nothing. You weren't there. You didn't see, he said. There must be something in books, things we can't imagine. To make a woman stay in a burning house, there must be something there. You don't say for nothing. She was simple-minded. She was rational as you and I, more so perhaps, and we burned her. That's water under the bridge. No, not water, fire. You ever seen a burned house? It smolders for days. Well, this fire'll last me the rest of my life. God, I've been trying to put it out in my mind all night. I'm crazy with trying. You should have thought of that before becoming a fireman. Thought, he said, was I given a choice? My grandfather and father were firemen. In my sleep, I ran after them. The parlor was playing a dance tune. This is the day you go on the early shift, said Mildred. You should have gone 2 hours ago. It's not just the woman that died, said Montague. Last night I thought about all the kerosene I've used in the past 10 years. And I thought about books, and for the first time I realized that a man was behind each one of those books. A man had to think them up. A man had to take a long time to put them down on paper. And I've never even thought that thought before. He got out of bed. It took some man a lifetime, maybe, to put some of his thoughts down, looking around at the world and life, and then I came along in 2 minutes and boom, it's all over. Let me alone, said Mildred. I didn't do anything. Let you alone, that's all very well, but how can I leave myself alone? We need not to let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while. How long is it since you were really bothered? About something important, about something real.